reproductive health and rights that tracks OECD donor funding for sexual reproductive rights, and that is authored by EPF and DSW. As you know, accountability tools are fundamental to keep donors accountable to the funding promises they make. With conservatism on the rise and so many women and girls still being denied the most fundamental rights around the world, sexual and reproductive health and rights must be a priority for nations and donors worldwide. Political will is crucial, as is funding. Official development assistance is one of the critical tools we need to allocate global, financial, and human resources for family planning and maternal health in every country. The Donors Delivering for Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights report comes at a pivotal moment as the health crisis and the consequences of the lockdown have already restricted access to sexual reproductive health and rights services and supplies. It is indeed estimated that the COVID-19 pandemic could result in an additional 49 million women with unmet need for modern contraceptives and an additional 15 million unintended pregnancies over the course of a year. On top of this sad reality lie uncertainties regarding the impact of the COVID health and economic crisis on future ODA budget. The existence of tools such as the Donors Delivering for Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights report are therefore essential not only to demonstrate current trends in ODA, but also to continue the commitment and momentum to support access to sexual and reproductive health and rights for the world's most vulnerable. It was encouraging to see that European governments were quick off the mark to recognize the risk and commit to prioritize sexual reproductive health rights and universal health coverage in their COVID-19 response, with many complementing these promises with financial commitments as part of their ODA. Indeed, Europe has a key role to play here, with the reinstatement of the Mexico City policy, better known as the Global Gag Rule, in 2017, the USA intention to withdraw from the WHO and attempts to compromise efforts gained by anti-gender groups. It is our responsibility to step up and make sure that life-saving funding for sexual reproductive human health rights services and supplies do not disappear. As policymakers and the sexual reproductive and health rights allies, it is more important than ever to ensure that these rights are high on the political agenda and to monitor ODA over the coming years. As Vice Chair of the Committee on Development of the European Parliament, I am deeply committed to make sexual reproductive health and rights a priority of EU development aid. Right from the start of my mandate, I insisted that European Union renew its Gender Action Plan, which is the instrument of the EU that promotes gender equality in its external action. It has been done last week on the occasion of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. The newly launched GAP Gender Action Plan 3 will be a valuable tool for empowering women all around the world. And it goes without saying that access to sexual and reproductive health and rights must be a priority. It will be my priority like a reporter. We will be able to talk about empowerment only when women will have full control over their bodies, when they can decide if they want children or not, and if so, how many and when they can give birth safely, when they can protect themselves against sexually transmitted diseases, and when we will finally lift the taboo surrounding sexuality, procreation, and menstruation. It is our role as politicians, as parliamentarians, to continue to advocate for sustained international development support and the women and girls' rights to ensure that we truly leave no one behind. As Vice Chair of the Committee on Development and this Parliament, I'm looking forward to the presentation of the main findings by Neil Data, EPF Secretary, and Cécile Vernant, Head of EU Office and DSW, and to the discussion of best practices that will be brought to us by Alana Galati, Associate Director for Global Policy at the Guttmacher Institute, and Jason Brenner, Director of Data and Performance Management at FP 2020. I invite all participants to share their question via the Q&A forum. They will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of this event. And this event is an initial launch with partners, parliamentarians, and the advisory committee that will be followed by further discussion with different groups and stakeholders in the coming months. So, without further notice, I invite Neil and Cécile to take the floor and present the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina Zacharopoulou. It's lovely to be here with you, and thank you for making time to moderate the session and to join us for the launch of this publication, Donors Delivering for SRHR. And I'm very pleased to be here also with our project partner, with Cécile Vernant from DSW, the Deutsche Stiftung Weltbevölkerung. We've been working together on this project for many years, so it's great to be able to present this together, especially this new publication to this new parliament. It's the first time we present it in this legislature. So I'll start maybe just by saying a few words about why a new accountability report. So 2020 has been exceptional for many ways, not just COVID or the US elections, but it's also a very pivotal moment in other ways. So exactly just about a year ago, a little more than a year and 1 week ago, many of us were in Nairobi for the summit celebrating 25 years of the ICPD Program of Action. And in this commemoration, we were able to note that while a lot of progress had been made in implementing the ICPD Program of Action on population and development, there remained a lot of work still to be done. And it's at that occasion that it's over 100 different financial commitments were made from different donor countries, program countries, partner countries, private sector, foundations. And this shows that there was really still a need and also a momentum for further financing the ICPD Program of Action. So that was a year ago. What was meant to take place this year, but has been postponed for COVID-related reasons to next year, is the celebration, the commemoration of the Beijing Platform of Action on Women's Rights. This will take the form of the Generation Equality Forum, scheduled to take place next year in Paris, and this provides a very welcome opportunity also to place the focus on what are we doing really to make the realization of women's rights a reality across the world. Also, it's another reason why this publication is very important is, as also was mentioned by Christina Zacharopoulou, we're facing entrenched opposition. This opposition there's always been opposition to sexual and reproductive health and rights, but this year it's really reached new levels with, and here in the EU, it has reached the levels of even member states deciding to block certain EU policies in relation to gender equality in its external action. So I think that's something we really need to consider. And then finally, it's another pivotal moment because of the uncertainties regarding the future of ODA budgets. We all have seen all of our economies contract significantly in manners unprecedented in many, many decades. And this naturally raises the question, what will happen to development aid in the coming future? And while these are legitimate concerns, we also have to remember that as much as we are suffering, those in developing countries are equally suffering, perhaps even more. So I think all of these things make this publication very timely for this year. Also, I'd just like to say a few words about this publication and how it is in continuity with the previous research project that we had done also with DSW entitled Euromapping, which Euromapping took a look at funding flows to reproductive health, family planning, and population assistance. This time, we've decided to refine the methodology. I won't get into details about this, but that will be Cécile. But so we've adapted and modernized the methodology. And we've done this with the help of a strategic advisory committee, which has engaged in a great deal of reflection, analyses and consultations in order to modernize and adapt the methodology so that this report, while there are many other reports also looking at various aspects of development aid, reproductive health, maternal health, or family planning, this report really zeroes in on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and specifically rights. And so I'll stop here and I'll let Cécile take over, who will take us through the methodology. Cécile?
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Thank you, everyone. Glad to be here indeed, as Neil mentioned, to present this report. And as you already alluded to, Neil, it's really a key moment to address SRHR in full and advance SRHR for everyone. And just to mention the recent Guttmacher and Lancet Commission report, which also proposed at international level a comprehensive narrative on those issues. So as we said, this is a new methodology, and it's actually something we developed together with the advisory committee. And it's based, in fact, on another methodology that was developed by the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the so-called Muskoka-2. And the Muskoka-2 methodology has been approved by experts and released earlier this year. And it's an update of a reporting system that was adopted by donor countries at the G7 meeting under the Canadian presidency in 2010 in Muskoka, hence the name. So what we do with the donors delivering for SRHR report is to apply subset and some of the aspects of the Muskoka-2 methodology to all OECD DAC donors. So while donor governments may have their own reporting system, this is a practical exercise that allows for comparison between donor countries. And when we do that, we looked at 3 different interlinked elements related to SRHR: reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health, RMSH, with the Muskoka-2 methodology, the family planning, using a subset of Muskoka-2 as agreed in the FP 2020 event in 2012, and SRHR, which is a subset of Muskoka-2 plus funding to sexual and reproductive rights. And to quantify how much is going for sexual and reproductive rights, we commissioned a thorough analysis of the OECD DAC reporting and project by consultant Andrea Oliveira. So you will see in the report, for each of the donor country, you will see the disbursement for those issues in absolute term, in volume, as well as relative term, meaning how much SRH disbursement is in terms of percentage of ODA. And that aims at showing the prioritization of SRHR within the donor international cooperation. So that's about the methodology, and now back to you, Neil, to start with the key findings.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Cécile. So for those of you who are curious about what Muskoka is, since Cécile mentioned it a number of times, Muskoka is a city in Canada where the G8 leaders met way back in 2010. And that's the first time where they set up a number of commitments to improve maternal, child, and newborn health. And they made financial commitments. And in order to track those commitments, they came up with the Muskoka methodology. And then that has been used since then by the G8 and then expanded to other countries. And then now there's the Muskoka 2 methodology, which has equally been agreed by the same set of countries. And we're using that methodology for this exercise. So in terms of the main findings, okay, so there's 4 main findings that are important to keep in mind. One is in terms of overall development aid. So in 2018, if you take a look at all 30 donor countries inside the OECD, development aid reached a total of $184 billion, almost 185 billion. Okay, so that's quite a lot. And in those, within that almost $185 billion, it's important to point out a few countries who have reached the UN goal of 0.7% of GNI to development aid. And among those countries, there are 5. There's Denmark, Luxembourg, Norway, Sweden, and the United Kingdom. So those are the only 5 donor countries that have reached that landmark of 0.7% of national wealth to development aid. So so notice again, Denmark, Luxembourg, Norway, Sweden, and the UK. Only the UK is a major economy there. The other ones are all medium to small economies. The next number to take a look at is RMNCH, reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health. That reached the level of $12.3 billion in 2018. There, the main thing to keep in mind about that number is the role of the United States. The United States alone accounted for 46% of that $12.3 billion. So that's so RMNCH, reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health, is heavily dependent upon US funding. The next number to take a look at is family planning, FP. That reached $2 billion in 2018. So you can see it's a small amount. However, it is an increase of 7% compared to the previous year of 2017. There, the 2 biggest countries, biggest donors in family planning as such, is the United States and the United Kingdom. Then we take a look at SRHR, sexual reproductive health and rights, reaching a total of $7.7 billion. There, the biggest donors are a slightly different grouping of countries. We have the United Kingdom, Germany, Netherlands, Canada, and the United States. So we see that there, the United States still features as a very important donor in all of them, and the United Kingdom as the second place donor in all of these, at least in all the reproductive areas. And this brings us to consider also what's been happening with the United States with the Global Gag Rule, as Chrysoula Zacharopoulou mentioned at the start. Well, it turns out that the Global Gag Rule has had a more nuanced impact on funding flows, where on the one hand, the US Congress was able to dampen some of its more damaging effects, but also the Global Gag Rule targets specific organizations rather than specific sectors, so that anything related to abortion directly or indirectly was specifically penalized, whereas other areas were less penalized. And then also, just to draw attention to the fact that I've mentioned the United Kingdom here a certain number of times, we have 2 UK members of parliament with us who will speak afterwards, but you may have all heard the shocking announcements last week about the projected significant decreases by, if I'm not mistaken, up to a third of UK development aid. And I would just invite you to consider what impact this may have on these numbers in following years. Next slide, please. Here is a ranking of how donor countries in Europe, so only the European countries, perform in terms of the percentage of their development aid that they allocate to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now, those of you, for example, some of the UK MPs listening here will remember that there are long-standing commitments by parliamentarians to allocate at least 10% of development aid to sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we can see that even the best countries fail in reaching this 10% threshold. the top performers are the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and the United Kingdom. And then the next tier of performers are Sweden, Ireland, Denmark, and Norway. So what we have here is a situation where, with the exception of the United Kingdom, it is the small to medium economies in Europe that are making SRHR a priority in their development aid, whereas the bigger economies, such as Germany, France, Italy, Spain, or the EU, are doing much less of this. And so there's very much an imbalance in who's carrying the weight of supporting sexual reproductive health and rights funding, and and then we need to see how this fits in relation to their public statements in relation to their support, their intended support to sexual and reproductive health and rights. Now it's over to you, Cécile.
Thank you, Neil. On the next slide, we'll see bigger trends for the past couple of years. And as you already mentioned, we've seen actually for the overall amount of spending disbursed to SRHR, that has been slightly an increase between 2016 and 2018. But of course, it depends on the countries. And you will see here on the left-hand side that some have increased, like the Netherlands, Canada, Italy, Norway, and the UK, but some have also decreased, the US, Japan, Korea, and Belgium for the last year of reporting. And just a note, the reason why you have those dates is because we use, as we mentioned, OECD DAC, and the last year of reporting is 2018. So that's also the reason why we have data up to 2018. So on the next slide, we're going to zoom in to conclude this key finding presentation on the EU itself. So looking at the EU, and here the EU is the institutions and the member states as well. And you know, they all represent more than half of the ODA in 2018. But when you look at SRHR, FP, and MRCH, they are a much smaller actor for this. When you see it's, for example, they represent total only 32% of all donors' SRHR disbursement. SRHR disbursements represent only 2.15% of the overall EU ODA, FP 0.65, and MNCH 4.11. And just to compare, the EU contribution to education overall represents 6.29% of its ODA. Just, I think on that is just to say that this is a picture of funding, but it does not reflect necessarily the EU long-standing commitments to those issues. And Honorable MEP Zarakopoulos already alluded to the Gender Action Plan that was released last week, where the EU even renewed its commitment to SRHR. So there's clearly a gap between the political commitments and the translation into funding and disbursement, meaning that politicians, like some of you in the room, need to reprioritize and those issues more in the EU development assistance. So to conclude, and before showing a short video to illustrate the findings of its report, we do hope this tool will be useful to you as allies and advocates to ensure that there is funding and commitments to advance SRHR for all across the globe and to translate into funding. But we know that this is only one piece of the puzzle. Of course, we need other essential critical elements like domestic resource mobilization. We need effective implementation and projects that will create impact and positive changes in people's lives. I would like to also thank all the people that worked in this report for years, Steffi, Martin, Sarah, Julie, and Fionn, and thank you all for your attention, and we'll remain at your disposal for any question you may have. And I think we're going to show a short video to conclude.
Thank you, Neil and Cecile. Thank you very much also for this nice video. I understood the message, but we have to make more always, and we will try. And of course, we have to make more also in Europe that we need today more than ever. So I would like now to move to the second part of our webinar. That will be a discussion on how donors can deliver for sexual and reproductive health and rights, a discussion on best practices. So I will invite to take the floor our first speaker, Alana Galati, who is Associate Director for Global Policy at the Guttmacher Institute. Ariana, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much. And welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good everything, wherever you happen to be. I'm very excited to share some thoughts on this excellent and incredibly timely report today. And if you are a visual person like myself, you will be very impressed with the graphics. They're really top notch. Okay, so as we all face down the scary reality of the continued fight against the pandemic and the economic strain and collapse due to that fight in many places around the world, guidance documents such as this report are really needed to keep our eye on commitments to SRHR, especially when there's multiple demands calling for everyone's attention at the same time. So in reviewing this report and contributing to this report and working with others on this report, I just want to touch upon 4 specific areas which I believe the report helps illustrate. And this has already been mentioned briefly by other speakers, but one is consistency. So before the pandemic, sexual reproductive health and rights was underfunded. Before 2017 and the current US administration, sexual reproductive health and rights was also underfunded. And despite all the numerous agreements and reports emphasizing the crucial role that SRHR plays in social welfare and development, like the SDGs or universal health coverage, it remains underfunded. COVID has exposed the gross underinvestment in a number of areas of society, and SRHR is no exception. And it really illustrates how fragile the system actually was. Investing in strong sexual and reproductive health and rights, whether that's education, counseling, or service delivery, does establish a stronger system to be resilient in the face of future challenges. And unfortunately, there will be future challenges, hopefully nothing like the pandemic again, but we need strong systems to push back. The report also shows the importance of consistently showing up, committing funds, not changing course despite shifting political leadership. And policy needs to be consistent and it needs to be positive. So what I mean is that policy making and decisions around SRHR are not defensive, they are proactive to advance SRHR, not a response to a bad policy that was made in the first place. And additionally, in consistency, I just want to talk about the continuation of long-term commitment. So election cycles, funding cycles can be 4 or 5 years. And whilst that's a short amount of time in the life course of someone needing SRH services, it can have a dramatic impact on the health of an individual or community. So being consistent in a position and providing stable funding is extremely important. And we've all lived through the past 4 years and have seen such a dramatic shift in the previously understood order and leadership on global health, including within the European Union. So when there is a vacuum, financially, verbally, politically, things start to collapse, and we're living through that right now. The next point that I think that this report helps emphasize is accountability and evidence. So we're able to see what governments said they were going to do and then what they actually did. People will continue to politicize sexual reproductive health and rights for their own grabs on power. And those distractions can sometimes result in a reduce of funding or a promise made and not fulfilled. And this is where the evidence shown by this report is really, really helpful for continued commitment and policymaking. Unfortunately, evidence-based policymaking is not the normal standard for policymaking. And I think once again, COVID has exposed this. So we know many governments, especially people on the call today, have had to re-examine or perhaps in some cases for the first time ever, examine the policies that they've had in place around sexual and reproductive health and rights. And this report, I think, shows the unnecessary burden that has been put on certain sectors within global health when it comes to advancing policy goals. The next thing I want to talk about is the neglected populations. So there's a variation in where the money's going, whether it's sexual reproductive rights or it's MNCH, or it is family planning. And we can see that sexual reproductive rights have been underfunded, as has family planning. But in addition to neglected populations that need those services and those neglected themes, I think the report also shows neglected countries. So countries who've neglected or not participated fully in their responsibility for sexual and reproductive health and rights. It's very important that we move beyond the familiar top 5 SRHR donor governments. And we start to cultivate new support from countries not currently using their voice for this global health issue, because everybody is re-examining systems and trying to rebuild or invent new in the face of COVID, especially health systems. We have an opportunity to cultivate stronger champions who are not the typical people in the room when it comes to SRHR. And then I think finally, this report shows, I mean, obviously it drew from DAC codes, but it shows that SRHR is a global commitment. We have multiple multilateral agreements that were in place before 2017. And they should be revisited as we think about what regional commitments are and individual commitments are to sexual reproductive health and rights. There's a lot of opportunity to tack on to conversations on rebuilding or economy or racial injustice or environment, where SRHR has a key vital role to play in order to fulfill those goals. So I think that this report is a great start. It, I think, will keep us honest when we think about what we said we were going to do and what needs to happen next in the face of any crisis that comes our way. So thanks so much, and happy morning from Washington, DC.
Thank you very much, Alana. And it is true, it is a nice start to this report. And I'd like to give the floor to our final speaker, Jason Brenner, Director, Data and Performance Management at FP 2020. Jason, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Crissola. First, I'd like to congratulate all the individuals and organizations who contributed to the report. It's been a long effort, as mentioned, and I've had an opportunity to observe and participate in a lot of the initial conversations regarding methodology. I've seen the improvements that were made over time based on feedback, and I've witnessed the hard work that it took to complete and publish this report. These annual reporting processes, often we just see a beautiful graphic at the end, but it takes years of effort to come to fruition, and so I'd like to congratulate them. Finance tracking is challenging, and I think this new report is a sign of how far we've come in tracking SRH financing and its subcomponents. At the outset of the initiative that I work with, Family Planning 2020, donors, country governments, global and country partners, they made commitments to reaching more women and girls, improving access to modern contraceptives. And many of these partners, including donor countries, focus countries, they made specific financial commitments. And tracking financing among the donors, the domestic country sources, as well as other sources, it's critical for assessing the state of SRH financing in each country, and it's also important for determining whether donors are in fact meeting those commitments. So this effort joins a growing community of finance tracking efforts that's working to better understand financing flows for SRH. And each year we can now count on several different partners to produce estimates of donor financing for different components of SRH. The methodologies and objectives differ, but the different partners are sharing, comparing data, discussing improvements, and the work is progressing as a community. And I believe that more sources will ultimately help us better understand the data and more critically look at SRH financing. We've also come a long way in understanding what countries and consumers are spending on SRH. And for example, we now have more data than ever, not just on the donor side, but on domestic expenditures on family planning and what countries spend from their own domestic resources. So using the donor estimates, the domestic expenditure estimates, and estimates of out-of-pocket consumer spending on contraceptive services, we're able now to look critically at donor financing as a proportion of overall spending. And this is really critical in the time of, in times like COVID. And so, just looking at family planning, for example, we can estimate that donor financing overall is approximately 50% of the total spend on family planning. But that proportion can vary greatly from country to country. For example, in countries like Kenya and Senegal, donor financing represents more than 60% of all spending on family planning services, whereas in Bangladesh, Indonesia, and the Philippines, it's less than 10% of all of the financing for family planning in those countries. So one can imagine in the time of COVID and spending pressures on donors, domestic government expenditures, and on consumers, that understanding these different components is so critical to understanding funding shortages for critical healthcare services. So this effort really puts us in a better place. It joins efforts like those by the Kaiser Family Foundation on donor tracking and family planning, domestic expenditure work by Avenir Health and UNFPA and the Needy Project, and the WHO System of Health Accounts, and finally by IHME. These all come together. I don't want to forget Guttmacher, who plays a critical role in helping us understand consumer spending. Thank you, Elena. So all of these pieces, they're pieces of a puzzle. And honestly, we don't have a complete picture yet. We're filling in piece by piece. And this work provides important redundancy in terms of understanding this puzzle. And critically, in a time of COVID, also the redundancy helps us when some of these systems of measurement fail, because while health systems are also are impacted, data systems are impacted as well. And redundancy in times like this is critical. So finally, I just want to say a word about the challenge that we still have ahead of us in finance tracking, and that is linking finance tracking with accountability efforts. We've learned that finance tracking for accountability is only useful if it's supported by detailed and clear commitments. As FP 2020 comes to a close here in 2020, we're honestly still struggling to assess whether donors and focus countries have met their financial commitments. We can track the financing, but the commitments themselves are challenging. We are now moving forward into a next partnership to 2030 and beyond. We're hoping for clearer guidance on financial commitments. We would like to see specified commitments on SRH, so more detail on SRH and its subcomponents. We'd like to see donors talking about their baseline. What's the baseline of current investment, and whether this commitment represents additional spending. We'd like to see whether the commitment represents an annual amount of funding or an amount specified over a period of time. And we'd like to specify the priority countries in which the focus is invested in. So which countries are part of that commitment. And then finally, as Elena mentioned, specifying specific priority populations and program areas is really critical. Our finance tracking can get better, but if the commitments themselves are still, I would say, largely political statements that don't have specificity, then it's very difficult for us to match that finance tracking with commitments, and then really, as we say, hold donors and countries accountable. So this is our challenge, and congratulations to the authors to contributing to overcoming this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. And now I would like to say that the people that they want to share the question via the Q&A forum, they are welcome, of course. And I'd like to invite now to take the floor the Honorable Tong who is co-chair of all-party parliamentary group on population, development and reproductive health, House of Lords in the United Kingdom. After, we'll have the pleasure to have with us the Honorable Sharma, who is a member of all-party parliamentary group on population development and reproductive health in United Kingdom Parliament. So you have 2 minutes and a half each. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I feel a little bit like the prisoner in the dock, I must say. I'm not proud of my country's record in the last year. And as an independent member of parliament, I can safely say that I don't belong to a political party anymore. As you know, this time last year, we were shocked to be taken over by a very, very rapid election, which resulted in the election of a right-wing Conservative Party with a majority of 80 seats. Now, that is a big majority. And they immediately combined the Foreign Office with the Department for International Development. That was the first action, which we were very upset and depressed about. Nevertheless, we were assured, and Baroness Liz Sugg, who some of you may have met at the international meetings, was made International Development Minister and was very good. And we were assured all along, and have been until very recently, that the funding for SRHR would simply not change. It was a top priority. Family planning especially was a top priority. And in recent years, we'd increased the funding for that. And it seemed like things would go on pretty well as normal. And before I go on, I would like to actually contest these, the methodology here. I find it very confusing because our government has told me quite recently on 2 occasions that our percentage of ODA that goes to SRH was in 16-17 10.3%, which we were very pleased about. And the year after that, between 2017-18, it was 13.6%. Now, I don't know how that equates with the 4-point-something% that the methodology, perhaps someone could explain that to me. I'm sure no one's cheating anybody, but those are the figures we've been given. But as a group, we've carried on. I think we've had a good year. Brenner will tell you, hopefully, some of the things we've been doing. But of course, the shock came, was it 2 weeks ago? I can't remember now, when the Chancellor of the Exchequer announced that because of COVID, not because of Brexit was not supposed to have affected anything, although that was another shock. Because of COVID, our budget had got to be severely curtailed. And the 0.7% of GNI going into ODA, into development, which was sacrosanct. It was an act of parliament which set that. It wasn't just an announcement, it was an act of parliament that went through parliament. And they announced that that was going to be cut to 0.5%, which is a third cut, which is a huge amount of money. I have tried to establish on 2 or 3 times now with questions whether, despite that, and in view of the government's priorities, the actual funding for SRH, excuse the abbreviations, but the actual funding will stay the same. In other words, it will be an even higher proportion of what's left after the cut. But I haven't really got an answer to that yet. So it really is very bad news from the UK at the moment. We are in a terrible financial position. There's no question about that. COVID-19 has hit the country very, very hard. But I am shocked and ashamed, deeply ashamed, that there's been this cut in our development aid, because that was Britain's pride and joy. It was certainly mine. I don't think there's anything else I'll say. Oh, there is one final point. I think it's great to look and compare how much money nations actually give to developing nations for this purpose. But I do think we ought to look more carefully at the outcomes in each of the countries that receive the aid. Because if you look at the overall figures, the world fertility rate is plummeting. It really is coming down very, very fast indeed. And I do think, I know it's in different parts of the world, but I do think we ought to somehow link funding with outcomes a little bit more. Thank you. And I'm sorry.
Thank you, Honorable Tonga, for your contribution. And of course, it's a pity that we have this cut on development aid from your country. That is historically, it is a country very important for the development. So I would like now to give the floor to the Honorable Sharma, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Baroness Tong, and it's a pleasure to follow her up. What I wanted to say, she has covered quite a lot on behalf of Britain. However, as a politician, it is right for me to focus more on the political aspects of what we are discussing here today. There are plenty of experts, which I previously heard, and I'm sure there will be more later on who have more knowledgeable than me. I will be careful to stay in my own lane where I fit in well. As a politician, aid and development have been at the heart of my focus during my 13 years in office as a member of parliament. Sexual and reproductive health and rights is the battleground, where religious and conservative extremists advocates the same level of control their kind once advocated for women's education, general women's empowerment, taking women out of poverty, for BAME rights, and even the working classes. Progressives have to recognize that. And this report does that and supports anyone with it to shout loud and clear about the importance of reproductive rights. I'm proud the UK, DFID, and the International Development Select Committee have all been such passionate defenders, which I was a member of that committee, or still am the member of that committee. Advocates and funders of good work for many years now. I'm deeply concerned. The merger of the FCO and DFID will risk diluting that great work, and that we will suffer a lack of focus from our loss of expertise. I'm also not sure Dominic Raab has quite the commitment to SRHR as we would want from the Secretary of State responsible. Only time will tell. But around the world, we have seen the US, once a passionate supporter of SRHR, lost all focus. Hopefully, that will return. And in countries even right on our borders in Europe, stricter or more draconian laws pop up regularly. This is not a fight that has been won or can be thought of as a done deal. The struggle is real and leaves millions of women unfree and trapped around the world. I will leave you with some thoughts on my own experiences. I was born in India before independence from Britain. I doubt anyone in my own village had heard the word feminism. My mother married very young and had 8 children. Rampyari Sharma, my mother, was an excellent mother, wife, and daughter. But sadly, she was defined by that. She was happy, but maybe my mother thought she could have achieved more if she had a proper education, or possibly she, as well as all do, merely wanted her children to have a better life than her. So she visioned a different world for her children, especially her daughters. She had seen villages blighted by malnutrition and poverty as a child. And so she took the extraordinary step when my sister was 4 years old of starting a small school in our village. While there had for many years been opportunities for boys to study, there was nowhere in my village, Mandali, for a girl to learn. So she secured a small schoolroom, hired a teacher from the next village to come and teach girls. And my own sister, Bimla, was the first people in the village. It was a great success, and soon many of our friends and neighbors were sending their girls too. After independence, and when I was only 2 years old, the new government of India accredited the school and took it over. So in 1949, we could boast official schools for both girls and boys. The school made a real difference to all our lives. My sister was the first to matriculate and eventually went to university, followed by my other 3 sisters. My mother put such a value on learning and education. It changed so many lives. Bimla trained to become a teacher and came back to village to teach another generation of girls, so to change lives and make difference. All because of the fire my mother lit in her. My other 3 sisters also went into professional jobs, not the first women in India to work, but certainly pioneers. None of them married young. All after 22, my mother ensured that they knew the value of their learning and the responsibility they had to live the best lives they could. So, alongside all the stories I hear when I meet survivors of abusive control and see studies of what waste of human potential there is, I still think back to 1947, when we give women and girls the power to follow their own course, not have it dictated by a man or by government. We see how much they can achieve. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the expertise in the field. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to pick up some questions. The first one, could you say more about what exactly you capture when you measure sexual and reproductive health rights? Maybe Cecile can answer to us, I think, or of course the other panelists, you're welcome to answer, but I think this question maybe Cecile, you can clarify a little bit the things.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for all the intervention that really adds to the picture. So we didn't go into too much detail, but I'm happy to give a few information, and we can follow up bilaterally. And you will see in the report, which will be live now, a whole annex that detail all the methodology. So actually, the Muskoka 2 is inputting fixed percentage on 25 CRS codes. Sorry, for those who know the OECD database. So it's kind of codes that allocates the project funding to a specific sector. So on 25 of them, including on health, population sector, water sanitation, humanitarian sector as well, and budget support, those 2 are new to Muskoka, they input a fixed percentage to all donors. So we apply that. But on top of this, we already cover health, quite a big part of health on this, reproductive health, maternal health, and child health on this. But to add the rights aspect, and this is the study we commissioned to an external consultant, was to review some other CRS codes. So like, for example, the basic life skills to include young and adults, because this is where you will see some of the comprehensive sexuality education projects, but also all the CSO supports, including women's rights organizations and sexual and gender-based violence projects. So we also include part of those code to try to capture part of those project funding. So I don't know if that explain a bit the methodology a bit further for at least for Jasper and Sarah. We're also happy to have a separate call to explain further methodology. But what I will also say, and that will answer some of the questions that the Baroness had as well, is this is a fixed percentage. So that's also the methodology we use, which might at times underestimate, at times overestimate some of the funding because it's a fixed percentage for all donors. I hope I answer in a concise manner. Happy to detail further if I didn't.
Thank you, Cécile. I don't know if somebody else wants to take the floor.
Crisula, may I just add?
Of course, Jason. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I think there are some questions also about, particular countries. There's been, somebody pointing out work that they did in Sweden and another person in Portugal. And I think it's important to differentiate these aligned methodologies across many countries and comparing versus the importance of still the work of country experts to look individually, country by country, at giving. We need both of those because I will tell you that you're looking at 2018 data. And so we're being asked, what is the impact of COVID on donor financing? We may not be able to answer that question until 2022, potentially. So country experts are going to have to look more closely at funding flows, in each country to understand that impact, because our aligned methodology probably won't give us insights into that for several years. So I think just want to make sure that we understand the balance of these aligned efforts and country-specific efforts, which are necessary. Thanks.
Yes.
Hello, it's Baroness Tong. Can I come back?
Of course, you are welcome.
I'm sorry to be very thick about this. I mean, maths is not my strong point, I must say, but I still don't understand why there is such a discrepancy in our government's calculation of the percentage we spend on SRHR and the methodology that you have used. There's a huge difference.
Neil, do you want to take that one? Yeah.
Yes, I'm happy to provide some light into that. The answer is very simple, because the answer is because your government uses a specific methodology to calculate its own percentage, but no other government uses the British methodology. And instead, the Swedes will have their own, the Belgians will have their own, the EU will have its own, the French, etc. So each country will have its own methodology, or what happens is that in many countries, there is no methodology at all. So that in Belgium, for example, they calculate health and then a little bit reproductive health, but not sexual reproductive health and rights. So it's simply a question of differing methodologies. And with this publication, we take the same methodology and we apply it across the board to all the different 30 donor countries. And then that's what you get. But for your work in the United Kingdom, you have the advantage of having your British methodology, and you've been asking parliamentary questions and keeping your government to account based on your methodology over the past many years. So if that's what works for you, stick with that. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So,
thank you. That's reassuring anyway, because I thought I was going to have to go back and say, hey, we need to double it.
Yeah, no. So no, but it's simply it's a simple question. It's different recipes for the same dish, and so yeah.
And I think, as Jason mentioned, we all need all of them. It's a mixture, because some might have the advantage like this one that we can compare, other will have actually the advantage like yours that will be accountable and follow consistently, as Alana said, the commitments. So
I'm sorry to labour this point, but does that mean, Neil in particular, that you want all countries to give 10% under your methodology?
No, not necessarily. I mean, 10% is a political ask.
Our target figure, wasn't it?
Yeah, 10% is a political ask. It's for you to, it's a tool for you as members of parliament to really raise with the executives in your countries to make the case for increased funding for sexual reproductive health and rights. But
sure.
Yeah. And I think in the UK, from what you and Virendra Sharma have been saying, I think you have a tough enough case to make simply for preserving the amount of funding that your government is giving, rather than asking for doubling it.
Very tough at the moment with this government, but they are in a bad place, I have to say.
But Neil, it's also unfortunate that the government has not, I'm not criticizing on the party line, it is overall, even the Conservatives are fully behind us. It's first not to merge the committee. It is a collective response from all the members of the International Development Select Committee, which includes SNP and Conservatives. There's quite a large number of very senior members of the Conservative Party also advocating that we should not drop any contribution further. But it's unfortunate the present political thinking has drifted away. But I hope that they will come into the common sense and come back on it.
And indeed, sadly, Baroness Sugg has resigned.
Because under protest. She did not resign for any other reason. She declared it under protest on the government's policy on this matter, especially on the SRHR, that she is resigning. So it's a very courageous step she has taken, and all the progressives has congratulated her, irrespective of political complexion.
So before, we have only 10 minutes, and I'd like to make this question. We have the Biden-Harris government now, United States, and I'd like to know from all the panelists, and I'd like to start with your permission from Alana Galati, who is there. Do you believe, or do you hope that we will have some changes regarding the sexual and reproductive rights during this presidency? Because you know how we had, how much women paid the Trump government, and of course all this politics. So I'd like to know the impact of this new government regarding women's health and particularly sexual reproductive rights. Please, Alana, the floor is yours, and of course everybody. It would be nice if can answer to this question.
Thank you. This seems to be the question I've received since I think the 4th of November. So yes, lots of thoughts. I'll start with the positive and then I'll start with the challenging. So the positive is just look at what's already been announced in terms of the cabinet: all female communications team, female secretary, female US UN ambassador, NSC. We have a number of very capable women of color who are being put forward as in leadership positions to project what America is going to follow and stand for. So I think just the mere cabinet nominations are a signal, not only to the United States, but also to the rest of the world about how this administration is going to engage. Now, I also think that there were a number of policies, initiatives, both bilateral and multilateral, that the current administration, the Trump administration, abandoned, ignored, or tried to redefine, specifically things around gender or women's economic empowerment, which became twisted and turned and redefined as part of Ivanka's pet project. And luckily that's been pushed back for any codification, so that's fabulous. So there was strong architecture. If you remember, like the last big global agreement we had were the SDGs, and SRHR was very, very well centered within that packet of global development commitments. So that's there. And what's happened is the vacuum of US leadership has led to incredible chaos, and then the active obstacle making that this current administration engaged with also led to further chaos, and I think in many cases stalled. So very good signals. If you look on the Biden-Harris webpage, you can see their women's plan. And whilst they're not overt on SRHR with a large plan, they are planning to repeal the Global Gag Rule and to be more engaged with gender. Now, Neil pointed out all these opportunities that were put to the side during 2020, but Beijing Plus 25 and the Generation Equality Forums. So there's big global gender events where we expect a Biden-Harris administration to take a leading role, engage, redefine gender, and link SRHR to that gender. But the challenge is, even if we get Georgia, Congress is divided. This is a very divided country. There are a lot of people who believe in the current administration's ideology, which is not supportive of SRHR and actually is not supportive of global health or development. The relationships that have been put into disarray because of the current administration. I caution colleagues overseas, this is not a light switch. There's been a lot of damage done. And when we talk about consistency, the US government, when there's conservatives versus progressives or liberals, there's a lot of inconsistency depending on a US administration, and the Trump administration took it to extremes that we had not imagined before. Rejoining the WHO will be a critical step for Biden's administration and further multilateral engagement. And I think the new secretary or the incoming secretary of state, the ambassador for US-UN, are seasoned diplomats who believe wholeheartedly in multilateralism and the US role in those spaces. And I don't think that the US government will shy away from SRHR, but that doesn't mean that everybody else can step back. Like all the momentum that was brought about by that vacuum of leadership should continue. That momentum should have been there before, when there was US leadership on this issue. And even in the report showing the US still was one of the largest contributors, along with the UK, to family planning, RMNCH, that even with that amount of money, there was still so much damage done. So alignment of funds and political leadership and the ability to convene like-minded and perhaps on-the-fence governments is a power that I think the US can reactivate. But the galvanizing effect of the Trump administration on anti-gender, anti-rights, anti-women organizations is profound, and it is lasting. And what has happened over the course of time, and Neil's done a lot of work on this, is that there is now an architecture in place for an alternate system from which anti-rights organizations and, quite frankly, anti-human governments can draw from. And that doesn't just go away. And I have concerns about, with the Global Gag Rule, what that type of policy exposes is how few countries in the world have proactive, positive SRHR policy. A lot of policy related to SRHR is made in response to bad US policy. So if we have governments continue the momentum and work on positive SRHR policy, and we have a Biden administration who's supportive of that, I think we will be in a really good place. The very last thing I will say is that the incoming administration's 4 key areas, the economy, racial injustice, climate change, and now I can't remember the 4th, maybe Jason, and COVID, right, that big thing. It demonstrates the intersectionality of the experience, and SRHR sits within all of those. SRHR related to climate change, SRHR related to COVID, SRHR related to the economy, and related to racial injustice. And so we see this not as a program, but as being embedded within all these activities. So that's a lot from me. Jason, your thoughts?
Jason, do you have something to add? We have 2 minutes.
I'd just say, I think Elena has said quite well, the change in leadership and politics that will come to this. And I'll just say that we shouldn't expect that this will actually change the funding available. The funding is done by Congress, not by the executive branch. And so the consistency of US funding has been there, but it's that leadership that will change. But we can't imagine that the amount available for SRHR will increase because of the Biden-Harris administration. That's not likely to happen. under the administration and this Congress. Okay, I'll pause there.
Thank you, thank you.
Can I add something?
Neil, yes.
Thank you. Just to build on what Alana and Jason said, one thing I think we need to keep in mind is to not personalize what's happened in the United States around the person of Donald Trump, but really to realize that all of these things, that all the bad things coming out of the US under the Trump administration had their roots within certain factions of the US Republican Party. And that party is still there. And eventually they will come back to power, whether it's in 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, or at some point. So that's something we need to keep in mind. So it's, as Alana said, it's not a light switch and everything's good now. The people who made this happen will be back in power at some point in the foreseeable future within our lifetimes. Another point, aside from the funding, is something Alana alluded to, and that's the alternative architecture that the United States has started to erect, which undermines sexual and reproductive health and rights, such as the Commission on Unalienable Rights, Religious Freedom Ministerial, different things like this, which undermine human rights in relation to sexuality and reproduction. And with the United States gone, this creates a vacuum for other states to take leadership on this area. Some of our well-known potential leaders, such as Poland and Hungary, ones such as Brazil and Russia. So I think that's something we need to keep in mind also as the US changes, but create space for other countries to take leadership.
I think that it's not going to change, as you said, the budget and all the things, but the most important is that we maybe politically we have a new leadership, and this is important for the new generation, I believe. And of course, to work with them again differently, and particularly when we are going to go, I hope, to see CSW in New York. I think I was there 2 times with my NGO and with the French minister during the period of Trump governance, and it was, you could feel it everywhere that was happening something. So I'm happy to be back. Maybe it's not going to change, as all of you said, but it is also moral. You know, it is something that we hope that we can work better together. And I wanted to thank all of you. This paper, this report, it is the beginning of a collaboration. We have to see it like that. We have many things to do, and we have to be less egoist when we speak about other continents, except Europe, for example, or maybe United States or United Kingdom. I think that we have not to be egoist this period of COVID. And we have to hope. We have to help all women all around the world. I was very happy to pass this 1 hour and a half with you, and I hope to see you again. Take care of you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
And thank you for your leadership on this issue, Chrysula.